to, hold on, wait. No, I need to open this. Bad network quality, well, that's good to know. Okay, well, actually, that's not the one I need. I need the one from last week. Apologies, guys, because I'm on my work laptop and I've not been on it for like 2 weeks, so I'm trying to get my bearings together. I'm just gonna go back to Teams. How do I do that? Ah, see. I've downloaded everything that I needed for to progress. Actually, I don't know what I've uploaded before, so I just need to quickly download it so I can just finish it off, because we've actually not got to the very end of last time. Muscles. Okay, it's doing it. Just a sec. Okay. There we are. What? Okay, we're in. So I can close this. I can minimize this. I can share this, and hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing. Yeah, all good. So I'm just going to quickly go over what we talked about last week. I'm going to spend 10 minutes just going really quickly over the muscle stuff. Yeah, and then I'm going to just continue from there. If you have any questions, feel free to just ask, shout at me and all that. Actually, in the meantime, it will be really helpful. No, let's just do it this way, so that way it's quicker. Yeah, so I'm just gonna pick the important things out. So we all know that we'll be talking about not cardiac, well, that's why this one, the skeletal muscle tissue. So we've got smooth, we've got cardiac, and we've got skeletal that you can't see, but we know about it. Yeah. Now, we know that it's mostly attached to skeleton, and mostly it's involved with voluntary contraction. Now, who can tell me, how do those muscles attach themselves to the bone? So how, through what sort of fibrous tissue do muscles attach to bones?
Is it your tendons?
It's your tendons. Okay, well done. Yeah. And also then we have ligaments. The ligaments then attach bone to bone, where tendons attach muscles to bone. Okay. We also said that we said that each muscle is rigged up with its own personal nerve, with its own artery, and with its own vein, right? So that's fine. The important stuff that we need to think about is the origin and the insertion point of a muscle. So what's the difference between the origin and insertion point? How do I know which one is which? Anybody? Feel free to just unmute and just talk to me.
Is the origin the one that's close to the center line of the body?
Exactly, yeah. So the origin is the one that's closer to the center line of the body, both in this and both in this plane. Okay, and essentially the skeletal muscles then pull the insertion point towards the origin, and not vice versa. So what you see here is the bicep in your arm, and it brings the forearm towards the shoulder, not the other way around. Okay, now muscles are always pulling. It's sort of a given, but that's true, yeah. So essentially, any sort of flexion or extension is always caused by two muscle groups, where one would facilitate mainly the extension, flexion, and the other one will facilitate the extension. Yeah, so it's time, that's right. Slow twitch, fast twitch, that's fine. Muscle tone. Okay, cool. So how would we define muscle tone? If I was to ask you guys, what is muscle tone? How do we define it? Excuse me. In layman's terms, if somebody asks you, you know, what's muscle tone, how would you define that?
Like the amount of tension left in a muscle when it's relaxed.
Exactly, Ellie. Yeah, that's exactly it. So essentially, you want to think about the muscle looking like this, and if it contracts, these are the actin and myosin filaments. This is how it contracts, and this is how it relaxes. With the muscle, it should be here. Now, if the muscle, if the tension in the muscle is too high, it would sort of look like that. Yeah, so that's where the muscles sort of feel really hard to touch, and sometimes it can be quite sore. If, however, muscle is too relaxed and is hypotonic, it means that they are sort of even further apart and they find it difficult to contract. Yeah, so, and if I really simplify that. Okay, so we then talked about muscles being hypertonic and hypotonic, didn't we? So what is the difference between a muscle being hyper versus hypotonic? Anybody? Could you give me some examples of hypertonic muscles? Hyper.
Your hip flexors, your lower back muscles, hamstrings.
Yep. Okay, great. So the hip flexors and the lower back muscles are probably the best examples of them. We are going to leave the hamstrings sort of out of description for now because they're a little bit more complicated the way we talk about their tension and the length. They're like a really annoying muscle to talk about properly. But yeah, so the flexors definitely, lower back definitely, and also all the shoulder muscles around here. So your pecs and your traps tend to also be hypertonic. Okay, then we talk, and so the hypertonic muscles are the one that they have too much tension, and we have to relax them and stretch them. You've got hypotonic muscles that have not enough tension, tend to have not enough tension, and those are the glutes and the abs, you know, predominantly, essentially. Yeah. Okay. So that's that. Right. So the muscle tone is the residual tension in the muscle. Okay, we talked about that. Right. And then we talked about the types of contractions. And this is quite a big one. It's quite an important one, right? So we've got two types of contractions in terms of the relationship of the length versus the tension. So the one where the tension doesn't change and where the tone changes, it's called what? So we know that if you say that the length doesn't change, that means that it's you know, the clues in the name. So one of them was isometric, another one was isotonic, and iso means the same. So the one that doesn't change is iso. Anybody guys talk to me? Unmute. The one that doesn't change is isometric. Yeah. So if you for example do like a plank, so your pectoral muscles and your tricep and your bicep and your flexors and your abs, all of them are working, but they don't change length, which means that it's an isometric contraction and the tone keeps going up. That's why you can't hold it forever. You sort of will become a time where it will be too much and you let go of it. Yeah. Now, if you are on the contrary of it, you've got the isotonic contraction, and the isotonic contraction is the one where the length changes, but the tone stays the same. So I'll get this here, and I'm gonna do that and bring it back down again. So if I'm moving it either in or either down, the length muscle changes because the muscle goes from here to here. So it shortens and lengthens, which means the tone of the muscle is going to be the same. But if you hold it halfway through and hold it like that, yeah, the chain muscle length doesn't change, but the tone continues to increase. Okay, so we've got the isotonic contraction that can be either concentric or eccentric, or you've got the isometric contraction that's just sort of stationary. And then, based on this, we talked about something that was called the PNF. So which one out of these contractions does the PNF work with? Which one out of these contractions does the PNF utilize? Come on, guys, talk. to me otherwise. Yes. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So isometric contraction. So what it does is that what PNF essentially utilizes is that if you, what we did in martial lesson the other day, you grab your leg and you push your foot into your hand and you'll create an isometric contraction in your flexor and in your upper quad. Yeah. And by that, the tension will continue to increase and increase and increase. And when you relax it, then the tension will decrease below the original level where it was. Will be more relaxed than it was before, and that's where you can stretch it. Yeah. So that's PNF. Okay. Right. That makes sense. And we didn't talk about agonist and antagonist muscles. So I think this is where we finished, didn't we, last week? Okay. Do you have any questions about what I've just said? Yeah. Is that clear? Okay. Guys, sorry, I'm just gonna bring the thingy down because I can't see anything. Apologies, one second. Are you guys still here? Sorry about that. It just kicked me out. For some reason, it's just my laptop just went completely dead. God, that's not... Okay, cool. So I'm here again. Right. So that makes sense. So we're going to move on to the last thing that's on this slide, and that is, I don't really need the slide, the agonist and antagonist muscles. So I'm just going to stop the share for a sec, and I'm going to talk to you for a little bit. So, right. So essentially, when we talk about hyperactive and hyperactive muscles, this actually goes with that as well. And essentially what you have to think about is that any movement that your muscles cause is always executed by more than one group of muscles, right? So for example, I'll just demonstrate it on my bicep. So if I do this, if I bring this water bottle towards my shoulder and bring it this way, it's the bicep that works the most, but there are also muscles over here on your forearm that are working at the same time. And all of these muscles on this side of the arm, on the upper side of the arm, then all work towards me being able to flex my arm. That makes sense, right? Now, all these muscles and these muscles over here are agonist muscles. They are working together towards on the same way. I'm flexing my sort of my forearm, or I'm closing my elbow, and as I'm doing that, it's my bicep muscles, also it's a little bit of my deltoid muscles, and also it's my muscles over here that help me together achieve this movement. In the same way, if I, for example, want to like kick, let's say if I was to lay down on my front and I want to bring my heels down to my bum, yeah? So let's say I would lay down on the front and bring just on the floor and bring my heels towards my bum. So what would happen is it would be both my glutes, actually all my glutes and my hamstrings and my calves to a certain extent would all help to facilitate that sort of movement. It's never just one muscle group. It's always more than one muscle group moving your limbs in specific directions. And those muscles that do, excuse me, the same movement together are called agonist muscles. On the contrary, there are muscles that are called antagonist, as in anti, as in sort of against each other. And those are the muscles that work against each other in two different directions of the same movement. right? So for example, if I'm doing this and I'm flexing my muscle this way, I'm sort of bringing this bottle towards here. Now my bicep is working. But if I was to then flip it the other way and bring the arm on the other side into the extension, it's going to be my tricep that's going to be working. It's the same movement, but because I'm extending my arm that way is the tricep. If I'm bringing my arm this way is the bicep. So essentially, if you look at your limbs, first of all, it's easiest to demonstrate this on the limbs, is your antagonist muscles are the ones that are essentially on opposite side of your body because they do two different things. So if you stand up, if you want to lean forward, it's going to your abs. If you want to stand back up, it's going to your lower back. So your abs and your lower back are antagonist muscles. If you wanted to push something away, like let's say you're doing an upper phase of a push-up, it's going to be all these muscles at the front that are working on one side. But if I grab something and pull it towards myself, I'm going to be working my back, which means that these muscles facilitate this and my back muscles facilitate that, which means they are antagonist muscles. Does it make sense? Yeah? In the same way, if I want to extend my leg one way out, you can't see it because I've got a rubbish camera. If I want to extend it, still can't see it. If I want to extend my leg, then I'm using my quads essentially. Yeah? But if I want to bend it, if I want to stand up and bend my leg backwards that way, then I'm using my hamstrings, which means that my quads and my hamstrings are antagonist muscles. Does it make sense? Yeah? So this distinction is really, really important when you then try to look at which muscles are working. Now, when you want to determine which muscle is working when, it's always good to have a look at the direction in which the limb or your body is moving and consider which way the gravity is going. So usually the muscle will be working in the opposite direction to the gravity, okay? So because I'm upright, if I want to go forward, and if I'm going to launch myself forward, because my body is traveling in that direction, it's going to be muscles in here that are working. But if I'm already forward, I'm going to stand up. If I'm traveling in that direction, I'm traveling towards my back, it's going to be the muscles on my back that are working. Yeah? If I've got something in my hands like this, and I'm going to push this arm up this way, it's going to be these muscles at the top that are working. But if there was something at the top that I would grab and pull down the pulley, not this, but pull down something at the top, then it will be muscles over here that will be working. So is the orientation of the gravity, so and the direction of the motion of the limb, that will determine which muscles are specifically working. Sometimes it's really intuitive because because you can feel your muscles working when you do specific things. Sometimes less so. So that's the best way to think about that. Yeah, think about gravity always pulls down. So if the movement of a whatever limb goes down, then it's okay. Sorry. Even better way of thinking about this is that your muscles always move the limbs throughout the joints, right? So it's only the joints that can be moved. You can't move the bone halfway through it. So then if you have a specific joint, then the limb within that specific joint is going to be moving in a specific direction. So then depending on where the direction is, if it's either with or against the gravity, then you can determine which of those muscles is working. Okay? Does it make sense? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, cool. So, right. So let's think about agonist and antagonist muscles before we move on. This is a really, really important one. Okay? So, right. So let's see. So, if let's say that I want to talk about my muscles at the front of my neck, right? Over here, right? Now, let's say that I want to find out what the antagonist muscle to that is. Which muscles would that be? So if this is the reference, which muscle would be antagonist to my front back muscles?
The back of your neck?
Say again, sorry?
The back of your neck.
Back of your neck, excellent. Okay, very good. Okay, cool, great. Right, that makes sense. Now, if I want to figure out an antagonist muscle to my chest, which ones would those be?
Is it the back of your shoulders?
Back of your shoulders, excellent. Yeah. So the antagonist muscles are sometimes quite simple to figure out, right? In this way. So by the same logic, it's your tummy and your abs. Antagonists to them are your lower back. Your flexors, antagonists to your flexors are your glutes. and then your quads and hamstrings are antagonist, and the front and your back of your shin are also antagonists. Does it make sense? Yeah. Now, and all of this is in the plane forward and back. Because if I was to lay it down on the floor, as I said before, if I'm pushing something away from myself, I'm using my chest. If I'm pulling something this way, I'm using my back. However, I can also do it in this sort of plane and in this sort of motion. So if the plane is this and not this, then okay, sorry, no, sorry. Let me just go back because I think I'm skipping a little bit. I'm just skipping a little bit. So talk about antagonist. Let's say that we are talking about the movement that I'm pushing my body away from something. Let's say I'm doing a push-up. Yeah, let's say I'm in a plank and I'm doing a push-up. And we know that I'm working on my chest while I'm doing a push-up, right? What is the main agonist muscle that will be working with my push-up? What is it in this phase of the push-up? With my chest. If I'm looking for agonist, with the one that works with.
Is it your biceps? Or not?
It's not the biceps.
Is it the
Think of a
tricep?
muscle. So it's the tricep, the first thing. Okay, well done. So it's because when you're pushing away, you extend in the arm. So you're working on the bicep, you're working on the tricep. Yeah, perfect. But even more so, even closer to the pecs. So it's a little bit clearer. So what is another muscle that's really close to the pecs that's going to be agonist once I'm pushing myself up? Not your chest, but also other muscles. It's your shoulders, yeah? So it's your anterior deltoid. So if you push in something this way, it's everything over here, but also the shoulder comes into it as well because it's pushing you in this direction. So it's your shoulder and pecs. Does it make sense? Yeah? Okay, now, but this is where it comes interesting. So this is in this plane. But what happens if I'm then going to do that and push myself upwards, that is in push something upwards this way? So if now, what muscles would be primarily making this move happen? From here, imagine that I've got this bottle in here and I'm extending it upwards. Which muscle would be primarily responsible for that?
Your bicep.
Yeah, not the bicep. So when you extend in your arm, it's always the tricep. When you bend in the arm, it's always the bicep. But even on your body, which part of which muscle, you can just tap on it if you don't know what it looks like. You can just say the name of the body part. Which arm, which body part would facilitate this in this plane?
The muscle.
Apart from our tricep.
The shoulder.
Muscle, yeah, shoulder, yeah, it was a muscle, yeah, cool, okay, right. So it's the shoulder essentially. However, if I want to find out an antagonist to my shoulder in this plane, which would be the antagonist to my shoulder in this movement? What would be the antagonist?
The bicep.
Think about it from the point of view of your shoulder, of your movement of the shoulder. So if you look at all the muscles that are here, you don't have to know where it is. You can just point which part of your body will be doing. Yeah, so that's your tricep, not so much. So think about. So it would be these muscles below your shoulder.
Is it your deltoids? Is that what they're called?
Okay, cool. So it would be these muscles in here. So these are your lats. So just hear me through. I'm just going to walk you through it, guys, and then you can ask any sort of questions. If I'm pushing in this direction, I'm working on this front. If I'm pulling in this direction, I'm working on my back. So with this sort of movement, my antagonist muscles are chest muscles and my back muscles. Correct? Makes sense, yeah? However, if I'm pushing something up and pulling it down, those antagonists change because the muscle that's working here primarily is my shoulder. And when I pull this down, it's going to be these muscles at the bottom of my shoulder that are the lats here underneath, not the tricep, but the muscles here that will facilitate the pulling down of the movement. So they're not the muscles in the middle of my back because they do this in this plane. But if I'm pulling my muscles down in this direction, then the antagonist is going to be below the shoulder. Does this make sense? Yeah? So it's the antagonist and agonist always depends on the direction where the limb is moving, particularly with shoulders that move in different directions. Okay? Cool. So in the same way, let me just see. So For example, if it's the same thing with your hip movements. So for example, if I stand up, if I want to flex my hip like this, right? So it's going to be sort of like, it's going to be my quad and all my flexors in here and a little bit my obliques that are working on it, right? And my antagonist, therefore, will be my glutes, etc., my hamstrings or whatever, yeah? But then if I do the same, if I work on the same joint, like my hip, and I do it this way, it completely changes because now the muscles that are working out on the side and its antagonists are here on the inside. So depending on where you move in the joint, in the direction where it's going, those are the muscles that are making that happen. All those muscles on that side are agonist muscles that are obliques and then glutes here and your vastus lateralis here, outwards. And its antagonist muscles are going to be on the inside because those are the ones that bring the leg in. So you have different agonist and antagonist muscles depending on whether you bring in the arm forward or whether you bring in it out sideways. Same thing with your shoulders. If you bring in if you're talking about this plane of motion, or when you talk about this plane of motion, or when you talk about this plane of motion, or when you talk about this plane of motion. Yeah. So it always changes. You have to think about it always from the direction of your movement. So the muscles that make the movement happen are the muscles, whatever they are, and then the muscles that help, those muscles are agonist, and muscles that go against that in the opposite direction are antagonist. Okay? Okay. So let's just do before we move on, because this is really important, guys. Yeah. So let's just see. Feel free to just shout at me. So let's say that I want to sort of grab something in front of me. Imagine there's a pulley in here, and I'm going to pull my arm out like this. Yeah. So let's say, you know, those you've been in the gym, you've seen those pulleys. Yeah. Or let's say that I'll grab like a elastic band that's sort of on a doorknob somewhere. I grab it and I want to extend it this way, and I'm going to pull this arm back. Which muscle? You don't have to know the name. You don't know the name yet. But as in sort of what body part, which part of your body would be working the most when you're grabbing this and moving in that direction to the back? Which muscles will be working? You can try it. You can put your arm there and try to do the resistance that one. You'll feel it anyway. Which muscles can you feel? If you
Is it like where your shoulder blade is, like that?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's the muscles of your back shoulder and all the muscles here at the back. So it's your traps and your radial deltoids and all that. Yeah, perfect, great. So that happens there. So I'm pulling it this way. Okay, great. And all these muscles then are agonistic because they work together. Which would be the antagonist muscles then to these muscles in this plane of movement?
Is it your pecs?
Yay, cool. It's your pecs. Yeah, because your pecs would then bring it forward. Yeah, so in that plane of motion would be that. Then if I decided to do this, again, it would change in the same way as we did with a push. So when I'm going up, I would be working all of this, and antagonist muscles would be here. Yeah, so you always have to think about the agonist versus antagonist in the plane of motion when you're working. Okay, right. And now one thing that I'm just going to finish off with before I move on to something else is that essentially it's good to know when you're looking at hypertonic versus hypotonic muscles, usually those muscles are antagonist, right? Because those muscles work in conjunction with one another, and usually one of them is the one that likes the button always and is always like tight and always wants to work, and the other one is the sloppy one. So if you look at your spine, so for example here, I may have talked about it last time. I'm just going to go over it again one more time. So if, for example, here at the front, this is the front of my neck that's hypertonic. Sorry, talking nonsense. Hypotonic, and back is hypertonic. And these are antagonist muscles in this plane of motion because they do this and this. Yes? And that's here. Then if I move one section lower, I've got my chest here, and I've got the middle back here at the middle. And those are, again, antagonists. And these are hypertonic because I tend to slouch, isn't it? I don't tend to do this. I tend to slouch when I'm being lazy, yeah? So these are hyper, and these are hypo. And if we move one even lower, we'll get to abs and lower back. And then when you add the abs and lower back, again, these abs are hypo, and these are hyper. Then, when you move one even lower, you get to your flexors and to your glutes, to your bum. and your flexors are hyper, and your bum is hypo, and then you got quads, etc., etc. But this essentially is the, is the biggest bulk of that. So if you look at your spine that goes like that, it's always hyper, hypo, hypo, hyper, hyper, hypo, hypo, hyper. So it goes like this. And they sort of even each other out. So it's really important, because then that way, the good thing, because that if you recognize that, you can recognize that there are agonist and antagonist muscle groups that are not directly related, but they are indirectly related. Let me show you what I mean. This is, I'm just going to go over that, and hopefully it's going to make sense. So just stand up again. So if you, for example, look at your hips, this is a really good idea. I'm just going to take this off, right? So if you look at your hips and your flexors, right? So you know that your hip flexors and your bum are antagonists, right? This is hyper and this is hypo. Now your abs and your lower back are also antagonists. This is hypo and this is hyper. So what you will find actually is that your bum, your glutes and your abs are actually agonist muscles, because they work together to facilitate same movement. Yeah, in a similar way as your lower back and your flexors, but it's usually looked at from the perspective of from the hypotonic muscle. So what happens that if you look at these two muscle groups is, if you tense your glutes, by tensing your glutes, you will allow your abs to come into play better. And you can try it yourself. You stand up, you bend your knees. If you just tense your bum as much as you can, naturally your hips will come sort of rotate underneath. So your hips will sort of move anteriorly forward. And with that, what will happen is this distance between the insertion and origin point of your abs will reduce, which will then allow your abs to also fire better and sort of make them sort of work better, if you will. So you will be able to engage them better, right? So your agonist muscles sometimes, when you talk about agonist muscles, they don't always have to be on the same side of the limb, like with the flexion here, or like a flexion here. But sometimes actually agonist muscles are also in a completely different parts of the body, because they, through mechanics of your body and through the nature of the hypo and hypertonic muscles, actually do work together. So for example, I can say that my bum and my abs are agonist. And I can say that my bum and my flexors are antagonist, right? Because the antagonist nature of the flexors and bum makes sense, but the agonist nature of the bum and abs doesn't, unless you understand this sort of logic. Yeah. So also, for example, and we'll talk about this a lot more in the second year, but I'm just going to go through it now because it's important for your training. So one thing what's also really good to know is that your adductor muscles, which muscles are your thigh adductor muscles? Where will you find them? Adductor. Where are they? Are they on the outside of your thighs, or on the inside of your thighs? The ones that do the adduction.
Thighs.
Say again, sorry?
Inside of thighs.
Inside of its eyes, right. So adductors are these muscles in here, right? So actually what you find is that when you activate your adductors, meaning let's say you would have like a fit ball in between your knees and you would press them together, by doing that, actually your hip adductors are actually agonist to your abs as well. So this is something that is not done mechanically, but it's done sort of neurologically. But you'll find yourself, if you were to sort of you can try it right now, even if you're sitting down, if you put your hands between your thighs like that and squeeze your thighs together as much as you can, and then try to activate your abs and squeeze them, you will find that you will find that they are engaged better and stronger than if you did it without the adduction. So for example, things like that are utilized quite a lot in fitness, where when you ask to do a lot of jumps in and out with your feet in and out, when your feet actually jumping together and you activating your adductors and you're jumping together, you are actually indirectly activating your core. So when we're doing all these jumps and I keep telling you keep your core tight, that's if you keep your core tight and keep it engaged in isometric contraction, then actually through your adductors, you'll be able to engage it even more. Yeah. So those are quite interesting relationships that we'll get to find out about later on towards the end of this module. So I'm just going to quickly sum up before I move on. So generally speaking, agonist muscles are the ones that facilitate same sort of movement together. And you usually find them on the same side of a limb. So agonist muscles are all of these muscles for flexion, and then all of these muscles for extension. Yeah, if I was to do that. Agonist muscles are all the ones here. If my sort of like my abs and flexors and my quads, when I want to flex my hip, or if I want to extend my hip and kick my leg back, it's going to be my lower back and my bum and my hamstrings. That are all agonist. They work on the same movement together. They are on the same side of that limb. If I'm looking at antagonist muscles, those antagonist muscles are the ones that are on opposite side of a joint in relation to the direction where the limb is being pushed or pulled. Yeah. So if my limbs are going in this direction, then my antagonists are here and in my back. But if I'm pushing something up and down, then the antagonists are here and below. Yeah. And also the interesting thing of sort of way of thinking about that is then also there are other agonists and sort of, yeah, then if you think about your spine, if you look at it in a sort of anterior posterior way, sort of from front to back, excuse me, you always have muscle groups paired in hypertonic, hypotonic, hypotonic, hypertonic, hypertonic, hypotonic, like that. Yeah. And with that also comes, there are also other relationships that come into play with that. For example, like the agonist relationship of your glutes and your abs, or your agonist relationship of your, I mean, those two are the most straightforward, I think, to demonstrate at this point. So yeah, so that's the one. And we also talked about the agonist relationship of your adductors with your abs. So really good thing to actually bear in mind is if you ever like at home and want to really work on your core and really want to work on your abs, the best thing to do if you're doing crunches is get something in between your knees, like grab either a pillow or if you've got like a fit ball or something and squeeze it. And by squeezing your adductors together, if you keep it squeezed and then doing crunches, your ab muscles will work twice as hard as they would otherwise do. Yeah. So we'll get to the ins and outs of this later on, but I think that suffices for now. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about what I've just talked about before I move on? Feel free, please feel free. Are you sure? Okay, so let's crack on. So I'm going to share this other thingy. Guys, okay, cool, hold on. I need to show you one thing also before we move on. I'm going to share my screen. Excuse the mess on my screen. Right. Okay, guys, so I hope you guys can see my screen at the moment. Now, this is a website that Rob kindly got us a subscription to. It's called muscleandmotion.com. I've been subscribed to, yeah?
I don't know why, but I can't see a screen.
Can you guys see it, or?
I
Yeah.
don't know why, but
I can see it.
It's all right. I've got it.
Got it?
Okay.
Okay, no problem. Great, that's fine. Yeah, so essentially this is a really useful tool when you're trying to learn anatomy. When you are going over our lectures, and I'm going to give you the slides and everything, it's all perfectly fine and you can learn from that, and it's really quite helpful. But the best way to do that is to have a look at the 3D diagram or 3D interpretation of how the muscle works specifically. And this website does that. So I need to make sure that it's renewed within this week because it's still not been renewed, but I'll make sure that it is renewed. So, it should at least work in some sort of a demo mode. So I'm going to show you how to get on it and how to use it. and you all will have sort of one login that you will share amongst yourselves, and you can just go in and do anytime you want to revise and to do revision. Yeah. So when I'm going to be presenting, I'm going to present both for muscle and motion as well as my slides, because it's a really good way to just make you understand how the muscles work. I'll show you in a minute. So you basically go onto muscleandmotion.com, you go into login pages, and there's an anatomy app login. So you click on that. You scroll down, and then you just sort of choose whichever bit you are on. So I'm on PC and Mac. Right, and then, hold a second. Enter as guest. Right, I've just entered as guest. I'll make sure that I'll get those signings or you. Okay, actually, you know what? Upper Arm is unlocked. So if you go into, I'll basically give you the signing details. You just sign in, and then you'll be able to, here on the left, go and pick different parts of human body, click on it. And what it does, it will then show you this. So this is, hold a second, I just need to move this quickly. Right, what I can now do is I can here click on rotate. This is your arm, by the way. Yeah, this is your lower arm. These are all the muscles that you need to, that you can sort of have a look at. And you can also remove muscle layers. So you can take it all the way down to the bare bone. You can add layers of muscles in here. Yeah, so essentially, if you get rid of all the muscles, then you will just see the skeleton. Yeah, you can also add the different layers of muscles that are there. And then, for example, let's say if you want to have a look at, sorry, this is lower arm. If I'm going to go to upper arm, right? So look, this is the bicep. So this is really clear. So you can see we know what I'm doing. So you can continue to rotate this like this. You can remove layers like that. Yeah. And if you add layers here, and let's say you've got, this is your bicep. If I click on that and scroll down, it shows me how that muscle is actually working, and it also talks you through your origin here and through the insertion point of the muscle. It's really, really handy. You know, we didn't have this stuff when I was in uni. So whenever you are revising, I would like to encourage you to just log into this. You can now, even as a guest, and I'll get the login fixed in for all the other body parts later on. And it's really, really handy. It's called muscleandmotion.com, and you are more than welcome to use it. Okay? Okay, cool. I'm just going to come out of that for a sec, and I'm going to stop I'm going to close this. I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to get my other PowerPoint up, which is, where are you? No, I don't need lower limb. I need upper limb. Hand down and shoulder. Okay, and then I'm going to come over here. And I'm going to share content, and I'm going to share this content. So hopefully you guys can see this, yeah? Okay, great. So I'm just going to walk you guys through this. We'll talk you through it. One thing I would also suggest for you to do, this is completely up to you, how do you want to do that? But what I've always found really helpful when I was learning anatomy myself is actually drawing diagrams. So once you know and understand what sort of bones, once you understand what sort of bones are there in a specific limb or wherever, then you'll be able to draw it somehow. And it's not about how detailed you draw it or anything, but if you can draw it somehow and then draw the muscle on top of those bones in a really super simplified way, as like a single line, to then be able to sort of annotate the origin and annotate the insertion point and write down the function. If you actually physically do it, you tend to remember it a lot easier. So I've always found it easy, as much as my drawing skills are like appalling. You don't want to see me draw anything, but it's not the point. Yeah, it's the fact that you actually sort of outline the line. Like if I was to do a bicep, I would literally just do sort of my humerus and my radius, and I would do like a single line of a bicep in between, and I would annotate where the origin is, I would annotate where the insertion point is, and I would write down what the function is. And just by doing that, is a lot more likely to stay there and you be able to remember it. It's something you can do. I'm not going to, obviously you can do whatever you like, but I would recommend to do that, particularly when you're revising or even whilst we talk about specific bones and stuff. So this is a picture of your arm. Now, I just have to make one thing clear, guys. Yeah, so there's a lot of sort of like Latin names, particularly when it comes to sort of bones in your body, etc. I'm only going to ask you to remember the ones that are the most basic and the most crucial. Yeah, so I'm not going to, we are going to keep it at like a medium level of resolution. Yeah, so like really big bones, like you can see here, like a humerus, radius, ulna. You should know what they're called because you would just find it easy to remember them rather than thinking, you know, like the arm bone or the elbow bone. It's a bit clumsy to call them like that. Yeah, the English names are really rubbish. So we're gonna basically just, when it comes to the bones, all I really need you to do is just your limb bones to have a basic idea of what they're called, because that way our communication is gonna be a lot easier. And also, once you start talking about the muscles, a lot of them have elements of those bones incorporated in them. It just becomes a lot easier. Yeah, so I'm just going to walk you guys through it. So this is an outline of what your arm looks like, and with your shoulder as well. So we'll start with the scapula. Your scapula is your shoulder blade, and it's over here. And it's obviously on your back. And this is your clavicle, which is your collarbone over here. Okay, and then you've got your humerus. So your humerus is this big bone on your body, on your arm over here. And then you've got two bones in here on your forearm. One is called the radius and one is called the ulna. Now, the best way to remember this is that the ulna has L in that, and so does the elbow. Yeah, so the ulna is the one that leads to your elbow, and it's this bone over here, and the radius is this one at the top. So you've got two bones in your forearm and one big bone over here. Humerus, radius, and ulna. Okay? Now, you've got sort of some other bones in here. I'm not really super bothered if you remember them or not, but you've got your carpal bones, which are the bones that make up your wrist. Yeah, so there are carpal bones that make up your wrist. There are metacarpal bones that make up your palm. So meta means before. So these are your carpal bones, metacarpal bones, and these are your fingers. Yeah, but we are not overly concerned about those. It's your, and also if you hear somewhere, if you like reading literature or whatever, when people talk about carpus or metacarpus, they then refer to carpus as your wrist and metacarpus as your palm of your hand, essentially. Yeah, so you can see your metacarpal bones are these four long bones here, and five actually, and then you've got your phalanges at the top. Okay, so that's straightforward. So you've got your scapula, you've got your clavicle, you've got your humerus, radius, and ulna, and that's all I need to know from when it comes to your bones in your arm. What I've included in here, if any of you sort of ever fancy printing it off or whatever, or if you just want to do it in drawings and in whatever, this is a blind one of that. So if you want to just maybe draw something similar or just do it on your screen, you are always welcome to mess around with that. Yeah, so this is your scapula. This is your clavicle. It's really not clear from this picture, but it goes forward, obviously. This is your humerus. Yeah, so you can see that your shoulder joint is between your scapula, your clavicle, and your humerus. And then here you've got your elbow joint, which basically has like three little subjoints, but it doesn't really matter for us. And then you've got your ulna, that's your elbow bone. And you've got this one at the top, that's your radius. And these are your carpal bones, and these are your metacarpal bones. But the names you will really need is got scapula, clavicle, humerus, radius, and ulna. Okay, it's not too bad, is it? It's all right. Okay, now we are going to move down to the arm. Now, the reason why I usually teach the arm first is a good way to just get our bearings right, because actually the muscles of the arm are not too much significance when it comes to your posture, but it's a good way of sort of getting our bearings and sort of figuring out what goes where. Okay, so we've got the first muscle in here, and I'm going to now go, actually, if I can, I'm going to come over here And I'm going to go, if I find out how I can go back, because it's changed from last year. Yay. Okay, cool. I'm going to remove layers. Right. Okay, cool. Right. Why is this being so unhelpful? Oh, there you go. Okay, cool. Right. So, guys, I'm just here hovering on this muscle over here, and it's called the brachioradialis. And it's the muscle that is over here, right underneath the elbow. You can feel the ridge. And if any of you have ever gone to the gym and have done like hammer curls this way, pulling them, you always feel this muscle really, really hurting. And it's one of the main agonist muscles that helps the bicep to do the elbow flexion. Yeah, so it's called brachioradialis, and it's this really thick muscle at the top of your radius. And if you click on that, it will then show you what it does. Yeah, and if you scroll down over here, you will, now one thing I have to make it clear that this app actually talks about the origins and the insertion points in like really a lot of detail. So I don't need you to know all the condyles and epicondyles and all this. That doesn't really matter. This I'm happy with that. Yeah. So if I ask you a question, where does brachioradialis originate? You don't have to know all that's written down in there, like the the ridge and all that. All I need to know is just technically, where is it? So it's the bottom part of your humerus. Yeah, that makes sense. And then the insertion point is on your radius. So essentially, it's just inserts here, just above your wrist. Yeah. So your brachioradialis starts over here, and then inserts over here. And you can see on the animation that that sort of does arm flexion, and actually usually does arm flexion when your palm is facing this way. It sort of it works with this way as well, but when you tilt your arm this way, it works even more. So if I go back into, hold a second, am I sharing my screen or not? I don't think I am.
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
I am. You guys can see it. Okay, great,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, perfect, brilliant. All right. So right. So if I now go back to my PowerPoint, can you now see the PowerPoint? Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So what I've done basically, I've screenshot this from the Muscle and Motion app, and then put it into PowerPoint, so you don't have to load it up all the time if you're just quickly revising. And you can see here that the blue one is the insertion point, and the yellow one is the origin. Sorry, the blue one is the origin, the yellow one is the insertion point, and the insertion point is being pulled towards the origin. Okay, and that's your brachioradialis. Now we are going to move towards our bicep. And now, if you look at your bicep, the reason why it's called bicep is because it's got two heads. It's got a short head and a long head, right? And both of them actually originate slightly at different positions, and they both insert in the same place. It's really well shown on this picture over here. Yeah. So again, I'm not bothered about the processes or anything like that. All I'm interested in is that your bicep originates on your scapula. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't know, actually, because a lot of people will think that it sort of originates somewhere here. So your bicep actually originates on your shoulder blades, and comes through this ridge down here, the long head, and then inserts through the bicep tendon at the top of your radius. Okay? So if I go back again into here, and I'll go into upper arm, and we'll have a look at bicep, and click on bicep. Right, you can see here the insertion point over here. So it's both of those both short and long head originate on the scapula in a slightly different point. I'm happy if you know that it originates on scapula and it inserts at the top of your humerus. Now, if you think about it, I'm going to go back again to my PowerPoint. This is the first couple of muscles that we can actually demonstrate how agonist muscles work. So I have a motion on my elbow when I'm flexing my elbow upwards. And I have two muscles that help me do that. Therefore, those muscles are agonist muscles, right? My brachioradialis is here, and my bicep is here. And you can see that how those muscles are laid across the joint, that actually helps them to do their job properly. So I hope you guys can see my arm, right? So that's the joint, and this is the center of where the arm has been, center of rotation essentially. And you've got the bicep that goes from here to here. You've got the brachioradialis that goes from here to here. You see what I mean? So then both of those muscles together are sort of capable of sort of creating larger torques and all that. Okay, so. And those are the two muscles that we are going to be concerned with when it comes to this part of your arm. So you've got your brachioradialis that originates at the bottom part of your humerus and inserts in here, just above your wrist. And you've got your bicep that's got two heads. Both of them originate on your scapula, and both of them insert here at the top of your radius. Okay? Is it okay? Yeah? Okay, and that's essentially agonist muscles of the flexion of the arm. So, for example, in a test, there could be a question as in which two muscles sort of are main facilitators of arm flexion, and you'd go biceps brachioradialis. Or you could say what, or I could ask something like, what is the main agonist of bicep muscle when flexing your arm? And you go brachioradialis. Yeah, something like that. So, okay, great. So that's it. And then we are coming to our triceps. Triceps. Now, biceps, it's called bi as in two, because it's got two heads. Triceps, it's called tri because it's got three heads. And they are actually quite neatly shown over here, and you can see them over here as well. So one of them is called the long head, then another one is called the lateral head, another one is called the medial head. So remember when I was telling you about the directions, anatomical directions, lateral outside, medial inside. So you know that this, when you flex your tricep, when you extend your arm like that, your tricep muscle is going to be coming through this way. So that's going to be your lateral head, because that's on the outside. And the one that's going to be on the inside is going to be the medial head, and then the one here is going to be the long head. Okay, and again, it's really good way of looking at that here is if we go back, and I'm just going to flip it and rotate it, and this is the back of the right arm. Okay, and now I'm here, and you can actually see those, you can see them in different parts, but I'm hoping that it's just going to show us the entire muscle anyway. Yeah, okay, right? So you can see that in here, it's essentially responsible for elbow extension, right? So you've got here, entire muscle elbow extension, right? And now if we see if we can go, you can choose muscle, the entire muscle, or the long head, or the lateral head, or the medial head. So we're gonna start with the long head, and the long head, I think it's doing it. Just a sec. No. It doesn't differentiate between them, but we'll just go back to this. We'll be able to have a look in here. Yeah, hold on. Hold on. Okay. All right. Okay, cool. Sorry, I was referring to the moving one, but it actually is showing up in here in this picture on the right. Okay. So this olecranon, this horrible word olecranon, is just this thing on your elbow that sticks out. Yeah, so that's the olecranon, right? And now what we're talking about is when we talk about the three tricep heads, is if you then click here, the long head, it shows you the long head in here. Now the long head originates on the scapula, here on your shoulder blade. If you click the lateral head originates here on the humerus. And if you go into your medial head also originates on the humerus, but a little bit lower. You can see that all three of those muscles insert through this massive tendon, through this elbow tendon, in your olecranon in here. Guys, can I ask you to mute your microphones, please, because it's bustling. That's not what I wanted. Okay, cool. Right? Okay. Now, bear in mind that the tricep muscles are not really that important, actually, what we're trying to achieve. But there's one of the heads that is important, because one of those heads actually has a role to play in your posture. Now, if you look at these three heads, you look at the long head, that's on your scapula, originates on your scapula. You look at the lateral head, that originates here, and you look at the medial head, that's in the middle, that's the smallest one out of them three. Which out of those three heads would be the only one that would contribute to stability of your shoulder? You think? What do you think? Because there's three heads. There's one, the long head that starts on this, that originates on the scapula, the medial one that originates at the top of the humerus, and the lateral one that originates down here. Which one crosses? Which one is the one that crosses the shoulder joint from the bottom?
Long head.
Is the long head, right? So that's the one that actually is interesting to us, because those two heads, all they do is just arm extension, essentially. Yeah, down or whichever. As soon as you extended your arm, which whatever direction, those are the two heads that are working on that, and that doesn't really do much to our posture. But the long head actually originates here, right? So it goes from here all the way down here and actually originates on your scapula. So what it does, it actually creates that the tension of your lateral, the long head of your triceps actually helps for your shoulder to be back where it's supposed to be, rather than down here where we don't want it to be, right? So that's one thing to remember, is that actually tricep muscle, the long head of the tricep muscle originates on the scapula. And by doing so, it crosses the shoulder joint at the back, and along with all the other muscles that we'll talk about later on, actually helps to stabilize the joint in this sort of plane. Okay? Okay, right. And the tricep muscle is the only muscle that we'll talk about when it comes to arm extension for the time being. Yeah, so we've got, when it comes to arm flexion, we've got your bicep and we've got your brachioradialis. They both overlap your shoulder joint because that's the center of rotation. Your bicep starts here and inserts here. Your brachioradialis starts here and inserts here, and they both do arm flexion. Yeah? Then your tricep muscles at the back, it's got three. You've got your long, medial, and lateral head. And the long head, they all insert through this sort of elbow tendon. You know, people who have like tennis elbows or whatever, they usually get an inflammation or tear in the tendon in here. So they all insert through the same tendon here, but they all originate at different places. And the one that interests us is the long head, because that actually inserts here on your scapula. Yeah, so that's it, right? And that's as far as we go when it comes to your actual arm, when it comes to your muscles of the arm. It's one of the less important parts, but because there's not that many muscles that we talk about, it's a good way of introducing you how this is going to work. Okay, right. I'm going to talk about one more. I'm going to show you how deltoids work, and I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so I'm going to move over here. And now we talked about, let me just go back to my PowerPoint, right? And here we go. So your shoulder essentially consists of three deltoid muscles. You've got three. And if you know your directions in anatomy, you already know what they're called. So you've got the anterior, you've got the middle one, and you've got the posterior, right? Now, before we think about where they actually originate and do all that, let's think about it a little bit. So I'm just gonna minimize this. I'm gonna get you guys up so I can see your faces, right? And why don't you tell me what sort of movements would the anterior deltoid would be involved in? What sort of movement would this, we actually talked about it already, would this muscle up here be involved in? Anybody, just unmute and just talk.
Was it that one where you did that?
So think about it. So if the muscle is up here to the front, what would be because in a way it would, but not majorly. What would be the main movement that this muscle would facilitate, considering it's pointing forwards? Is the one at the front, right here. What would it do?
Lifting your arm.
Okay, so if you bring your arm and if you flex your arm forward, definitely, it would definitely do that, right? So it's arm flexion, right? This way, because you're doing it to the front. It would also, when you're doing a push-up, yeah, when you go forward like that, you are working on your pecs, but your anterior deltoid will be an agonist muscle to that. When you're doing this and pushing away, it's your pecs and your anterior deltoid. So your anterior deltoid does pushing forward and bringing arm forward because it's at the forward of your joint, at the front of your joint, right? Right. What would the medial, the one in the middle, do mostly? What do you think? So this is the front of your shoulder, and there's a shoulder in the middle here. There's a muscle here in the middle. What would it do mostly?
Abduction.
Yes, who said that?
Me, Megan.
Awesome, great. Yeah, it would do abduction. Yeah, so this is all medial deltoid. All of this stuff, when you're bringing your arm up like that, it's all your medium deltoid. Also, when you're pushing anything upwards this way, it's your medial and your front, but mostly your medial deltoid. Okay, yeah, that's it. Perfect. Now we've got the rear deltoids. What will the rear deltoids be doing? These are a little bit less straightforward. And we also talked about that motion earlier.
Is it if you pull something?
Yeah, so if you pull it, but more specifically, if you pull it like this, because if you were to pull it like that towards yourself, it would sort of be more like your middle back muscle. But when you take it round this way, so we call this the horizontal extension. Yeah. So you would then work the muscles here at the back, at the posterior. You are not wrong actually. When you pull in, you're also working your posterior deltoid as well. Yeah. So pulling and outwards, or even if your elbow is in and you're pulling it outwards there, it's your back deltoid. Okay, cool. Now we look at the deltoid muscles, and you've got your anterior at the front, medial in the middle, and posterior at the back. Which ones out of those would be hypertonic? Hypertonic, the one that would be really stiff and we have to stretch a lot, and the one that would make our posture to be in a way that we don't want. Would it be the front or the middle or the back?
Is it the middle?
It's the middle one, sort of has just like a stabilizing component that usually does this. But remember when we talked about our posture at the top, which way do our shoulders have a tendency to go that we don't want them to go? Forward or back?
Forward.
Forward. So which one would be, so would this one be hyper, so would this one be hyper or hypotonic?
Hyper.
Hyper, yeah, this is the hyper one. Yeah, so it's the pecs and your front deltoid that tends to be tight, and we have to stretch it as much as we can to make sure that our shoulders don't slouch. Yeah. Conversely, you look at the back here, the posterior deltoid is lazy and doesn't really want to work. Therefore, we need to do a lot of stabilizing exercises like flat backs and things like that, where we encourage the sort of back of your shoulder to work a little bit more. Yeah, that's why we're doing, like when you lay down on the floor and lift your arms up, and when you're doing flat backs straight and flat backs on the side, that's all activating your posterior deltoids. Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so those are your deltoid muscles. Now, let's just quickly have a look at what they're doing. Yeah, so if you look at this, guys, look, yeah, so I can actually rotate, and I've got the whole deltoid here. So if I click on it, and that's what's happening. This is what your deltoid looks like. And now I can isolate and can go anterior. So anterior is the front. And see now on the right is the yellow part, that is the anterior one. Now here, it says that it originates on the clavicle, which means that it starts here on your collarbone. So this is where it originates, and ends up down, goes down forward this way and ends up inserted into this region in your humerus. Okay? Now, if you move to your middle deltoid, then the middle deltoid is right bang on in the middle, and essentially then it originates on your scapula, on the outer part of your scapula, because your scapula, one thing I didn't really explain in sufficient detail, I don't think, is if I go back here, and if I go back to very beginning actually, if you look at this picture here, you can see how the scapula and the clavicle are all connected. Okay, so that's your shoulder blade, and your clavicle, your collarbone is connected to your scapula, and then continues going forward, and then in here, this is where it connects to the ribs. Yeah, so it's all a part of one sort of shoulder girdle that we call it. Yeah, and now if I go back to here, then you can see how those origin points essentially just basically follow this perimeter here. So the anterior origin is this sort of clavicle, then the middle origin is over here on the scapular ridge, and then the posterior origin is come on. Yeah, it's not switching it, but you guys can infer it. Yeah, so you can think about this as so you can think about your deltoids in the sense you've got your front one, your front deltoid, the anterior. There it is, finally. Right. If you look at your scapula, look at your scapula from the back, and there is this ridge that continues at the top, all the way towards your shoulder, and then this is where the scapula meets the clavicle, the collarbone, and then continues going forward. So all of this is just a continuous, like a structure that is interrupted in the middle by the shoulder. So then, if you look at your origins of your deltoid muscles, your rear deltoid muscle originates all the way over here, your middle one originates there, and your anterior one originates at the top on your clavicle. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward, and they all essentially feed into the same tendon that inserts like right in here, right in the middle, underneath the tricep. Yeah. So, and then that's it. And here you can have a look at the function of your posterior deltoid. So that this is what they're doing, like opening up that way. So it's the rear deltoid essentially that causes issues with shoulder stability. So for example, I'm pretty sure, hold on a second, I'm just going to stop the share. A lot of special dancers often suffer with shoulder injuries. Shoulder is a really rubbish joint because it's got a huge range of motion. It's got the biggest range of motion out of all the joints in your human body. And because of that, it sort of requires quite a lot of stabilization. And often, as dancers, we tend to do a lot of things forward, and particularly when we dance and really, really full out, our front, because the front is really hypertonic, this tends to get stronger and really shorter and more pronounced. And the back of our shoulder, including all the other muscles that belong there, tend to get weaker. And what that happens is that the shoulder loses its stability and then tends to sort of dislocate or whatever, and then people get surgeries and whatever. So, as we established with our shoulders that this is too strong and hypertonic and this is hypotonic, therefore we need to stretch this and we need to strengthen the back to be able to equalize our shoulders. Okay? For us to find out how we're going to do that, we are going to do that later on. And I think I spoke for long enough. What do you think? Right, we go through, I think, a decent amount, guys, today. So we go through the entire upper limb. We had a look at the skeleton as well as the muscles, and that's all the muscles that we're talking about on our arm. And so when I see you next week, we got to move on to the lower limb, onto the leg, and things will start becoming a little bit more practical, because the reason why I teach the arm first is just for us to have an idea of how things work, but actually practically it doesn't have any, apart from the tricep and the deltoids, but the arm itself doesn't really have any practical effect on our posture, but the legs really do, big time. Yeah, so we'll get to that next week. Is there anything you would like to ask towards the end, guys? Feel free. Anything that's really unclear you'd like me to go over or anything like that? No? Everybody's happy? Okay, guys. So I'm not sure actually. Hold on. Oh, it is recording still. Okay, cool. So I'm going to post the recording. I'm going to post the those couple of slides that I've been working from. So feel free to look back. What may be helpful before I see you again next week, just like right before, they just try to skim it quickly so you are so on the same page, so we can quickly go over that. Every single lecture, I'm going to recap what I've done last week in about 10 minutes. Yeah, then we are going to move on to the leg. And I guess the last thing I'd like to say is just, yeah, like try to bear with it, because I know this is not like the most interesting part of it. It's a little bit irritating because you just have to remember things. You have to like visualize where things are, but it's crucial for us to be able to then talk about the substance. Yeah, so it's difficult to talk about substance if we don't know where the muscles are, what they do. So this is the tedious part that we need to get through. So I think that's it for me, and I'll catch you guys later. I don't know where I'll teach you next. I'm not sure. I think I may have some of you tomorrow, and if not, I still don't remember my timetable. I'll see you shortly, I'm sure. And I'll be booking my one-to-one tutorials probably at some point tomorrow. So when I get a chance, I'm just gonna come up with a list, and I'll just gonna post it, and we'll do maybe 10 minutes each, and we can make sure that you are all set and all good to go. Okay, all right, guys, have a good one, and I'll
Thank you.
see
Thank you.
you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.